Are there political hitmen, in a sense, that do dirty tricks inside political campaigns? I know what you're thinking. Of course. Well, but look, hold on. How much do they exist? What do they do? What are those so-called dirty tricks? Why don't we find out? We're going to talk to Jesse Brown. He's the publisher and editor-in-chief of Canadaland, and their latest podcast is called Ratf, Confessions of a Dirty Tricks Operative. Wow. Jesse, welcome to the show, and tell us who in the world we're talking about.
Hi, Cenk. It's a pleasure to be here. We're talking about a guy named David Wallace. And David Wallace presented himself to me and my colleague, reporter Shuri Sucharan, at our news organization, over the internet, of course, and made himself known to us as he calls himself a fixer, calls himself a bagman, and as a lot of your viewers will know, in politics, there is this term for manipulation and deceit in a political context, and that is rat effing. And in the podcast we use the full vulgarity, but he considers himself a rat effer for hire. And I think you're absolutely right that everybody knows that there are guys like this. There are political hitmen out there who destroy people's careers, use deceit and manipulation to do so. We're just never supposed to meet them. The whole point of people like this is they're supposed to be working in the shadows. So this was a very rare and enticing prospect for journalists. Here is somebody who says that that's what they do for a living and has been doing it, he claimed, for decades. And he's ready to come clean, and he's ready to hand over his files and all of his communications with his clientele, which were almost exclusively conservative politicians, political strategists, and the like.
To which I also say, of course. All right, so we're gonna get into how he did the dirty tricks. But first, I wanna play a trailer for the podcast because I thought it was really interesting. Let's listen in.
Rat is basically killing your own opposition. Rat is internal, dirty laundry that makes its way into the media. And I take on rat job so I can get compromising material on politicians that I can use at a later date. That's rat.
The Klondike Papers, the latest conspiracy theory circulating on social media.
Have you guys looked into the Klondike Papers at all? This is
some crazy allegations among the conservative party.
Those far-right movements, they don't even realize who's pulling the strings.
He's a con man, and I think he's a pretty good con man.
David couldn't be trusted because he'd gone over to the other side and was giving stuff away to the people he's supposed to be hunting down.
Some people tell you absolutely fantastical stories and they turn out to be true.
Okay, 1,000 questions. Jesse, first, before we get to the Klondike Papers, how did he do it? So let's say somebody hires him, they say, okay, I'm running against Jim Jablowski over here, go destroy him. What does he do next?
Well, he has a number of tricks up his sleeve. He says that he likes to work with the truth. He likes when the people he's trying to destroy actually do have real secrets, real dirty laundry. But he kind of takes it on the word of the enemies of his targets that the person has dirty laundry to hide. It's not like he does the work of verifying that this person actually is corrupted. So I'll be a bit more specific. One story that we vetted and verified for our podcast is this claim he makes that he was involved in a plot to take down the mayor of Calgary. Calgary, Alberta. This is a ridiculously wealthy oil town from the oil sands in Alberta. It's sort of like, Canada's Texas. It's the Wild West of Canada, staunchly conservative, but they had this very progressive mayor, Naheed Nenshi. It's actually the first Muslim mayor of any major North American city. And Nenshi had made enemies of housing developers because he wanted to curb the unfettered sprawl of Calgary. And so what David Wallace told us is that a group of Nenshi's enemies hired him and told him that Nenshi was corrupt. that Nenshi was somebody who could be enticed into a plot. So he set up what he called a big store con. He rolled into Calgary and presented himself to city councilors and to the mayor, saying that he represented $40 billion of Russian investment money, clean money, nothing to worry about here, clean money. And he represents investors who wish to invest in Calgary. The plan was, if he could get these city councilors and the mayor on the hook, taking this money and signing intention to have a bilateral trade agreement with Russia, that's when they would be secretly videotaped. It would be revealed that this money was sanctioned Russian money, dirty money, and this would be used and released to the public, perhaps through a reporter like myself, as a way of taking down the democratically elected mayor of Calgary. And this was a wild tale. And David Wallace, by way of introduction, told us, "It's nice to meet you. I deceive reporters for a living, and now I want to tell you some stories." So of course we had to just vigorously check everything he told us. We were able to confirm that this is true, and we spoke to a city councilor who he tried to trick in this scheme. And this was a scheme that did not work because, and here I'll spoil some material from our first episode, but the mayor of Calgary was not corruptible. It's just stuff that you always kind of suspect happens, but I can't think of any other occasion where we'd actually hear these stories and actually get them confirmed.
That is amazing. So I'm also curious about the part where they then go to reporters and get it out in the public. Because I vote, because there's, as bad as David Wallace and like these dirty tricks, et cetera, and traps, et cetera, but there's also just normal oppo research that almost all politicians do. And then, in my opinion, especially in America, they plant that with reporters, and reporters barely check to see if it's true, and then they just run it, and they wind up being, in my opinion, co-conspirators to these dirty tricks. So how does he get the reporters to cover his dirty tricks?
Well, I mean, you point out a really big problem, and here in Canada, we had another case, another one with which David Wallace was involved, where Patrick Brown was a gentleman who was basically a shoo-in to be the next premier of Ontario. Now that's the second highest political office in Canada, second only to the prime minister. And he was just, it was sort of a done deal. And he went down like instantaneously over a series of Me Too type allegations. Now, this is an interesting scenario where I don't think that I want to challenge the veracity of the allegations, but it was also very clear that whoever was pulling the strings and shopping these allegations and bringing the story to reporters, there was obviously some political strategy and machinations at work here. So it's hard from the point of view of a reporter, when somebody brings you information about a political figure and you can go and independently verify that it's true. Well, you've got a scoop that nobody else has, and you could even argue that you've got a duty to report that. At the same time, the person who brought it to you, it's not always somebody of virtue true who thinks that the public has a right to know about. Often you're being shopped or fed information or leaked information from people who are in the game, and I think that puts reporters in a very difficult position. I don't know that I would be comfortable withholding that information, but I think I share your concern about being used as a tool. It's almost like you want to tell the public what you learned, but also how you learned it and who you got it from. But often those are conditions that reporters agree to when they're receiving information that they're not going to tell.
Yeah. So funny enough, I was actually just in Calgary, but from an outsider's perspective, being an American, Canada seems, compared to us, relatively clean, or maybe squeaky clean, right? But here in America, I don't see any reporters doing double checking anything. I mean, they get handed a so-called leak, they're printing it, they don't give a damn. And in fact, I think they are the establishment. They love smearing, especially outsiders. And so, anyways, that's just, they can't get it out without going through reporters. So the reporters have to work with them in order for these dirty tricks to work. And now, as you say, there's an obligation if it's true, right? And that's why it's incumbent upon reporters to do more due diligence, as you guys did. So when you did that in this particular case, why did David Wallace come forward? Why didn't he just keep doing these dirty tricks?
Well, that kind of becomes the $1 million question of our show, because there's what he claims, and I think we have to be skeptical. And his story was that he'd been doing this kind of work for almost 3 decades. He'd been doing it not just in Canada for politicians and conservatives in Canada. He'd been working for oligarchs in Russia. He claims that for many years his base of operations was this notorious bar in Moscow called the Hungry Duck. He has wild stories about the jobs he would do for wealthy businessmen, and often it was reporters who he was actually hired to stop. Reporters who were reporting the truth about business people, and he would find ways to get them arrested. Just incredible stories. He claims he worked with the FBI. Again, there was a scheme in New York State. It goes on and on. He's just pouring this stuff out, and we keep asking, why? Why are you telling us this? You're not just implicating all of these people who are going to be pretty upset with you, but you're implicating yourself. And the reason he gave us is really where this story just opened up into a whole maze of new plot twists. What he told us was that he had been hired through his conservative connections in Alberta, in Calgary. He had been connected to a fundamentalist Christian sect with extensive business interests and extensive connections to politicians. And this Christian sect, they are called the Plymouth Brethren. They are functional in the UK and Australia. You can read all kinds of investigations and news stories about the Plymouth Brethren. They do have lots of connections to government. They have received millions and millions of dollars in controversial COVID contracts. And they do have a lot of political influence in circles. And what David Wallace told us is that they had hired him to track down a former member of their group who had left this religious group and was basically turned into a whistleblower. And that when he succeeded in finding this guy, Wallace became very suspicious about what was going to be done with this guy. And what he claims is he had essentially a crisis of conscience, that he got to the crossroads and was increasingly suspicious that this was not your typical dirty tricks job, that this might be moving into darker territory. And he felt he might be personally implicated. He might be getting set up for liability. And he also claims that he was very concerned about what was going to happen to this ex-member of this fundamentalist Christian group. So a lot of our work in the series is investigating those claims and saying, is it accurate that David Wallace finally found his conscience, or are there other motivations driving him?
Okay, and real quick, Klondike Papers, what are they?
Well, the Klondike Papers, really, we wouldn't have pursued this or been able to confirm any of this without them. These are David Wallace's files. These are 6,400 pages of emails and text messages and metadata. And it's just astonishing to go through this and to see the types of people he was communicating with. He was communicating with some fairly high level political figures, not just in Canada, but around the world. And it's often very difficult to get the context, what he's talking about. There's a lot of uses of aliases, but really it was this treasure trove of tips. And our job was to, first of all, is this doctored? Are these documents fraudulent? Can we verify that they're real? And then if they are real, what are the stories that they tell? Now, we were doing our work, which is slow, methodical work of journalism, picking specific stories that spans years and trying to report them out and getting people to verify them. Meanwhile, there was rumor and word of these Klondike Papers spilled onto the internet, and a hashtag, Klondike Papers, hit millions of people in Canada very quickly. A lot of people were commenting on the Klondike Papers who had never seen them or read them. And I think it's safe to say that it became something of a conspiracy theory, and people were jumping to a lot of conclusions and making the darkest inferences and conclusions from these papers without really knowing whether they're true or not.
All right, fine, you win. We got to watch it or listen to it. It's a super interesting story. The podcasting network is Canadaland. That's where you can find it. You can find it, of course, anywhere where there's podcasts. And this particular podcast is called Ratf, the actual thing, Confessions of a Dirty Tricks Operative. All right, Jesse Brown, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It was fun talking with you. Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat, emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.